When I was preparing this talk, I couldn't decide how to open. So I asked my AI assistant to write a professional bio. And it confidently wrote that I am a renowned quantum physicist, professional ballet dancer, and a former astronaut who summited Mount Everest twice. In reality, my greatest achievement is to remember password without clicking forgot password 3 times in a row. That's the gap, and that's why we are here for this talk. In all seriousness, I have spent the last decade building products for millions of users across the world who use them daily. I currently work at Adobe on AI for Digital Experience Cloud, the lesser known brother of Creative Cloud. We build AI that can predict customer behavior with uncanny accuracy, but somehow I still can't figure out how I continue to watch terrible Netflix documentaries at 2 a.m. And that algorithm is still in development. Let me tell you about a very recent personal AI trust crisis. So last month, I was driving and my navigation app routed me through what appeared to be someone's backyard during rush hour. And I'm not even exaggerating. There was children's swing set involved. But the app kept insisting that this is 7 minutes faster than the highway. A good, obedient human like me followed it. 20 minutes later, after narrowly avoiding somebody's barbecue, I emerged on the exact same road I could have taken directly. And when I tried to understand why, the app simply blanked at me saying, I am an algorithm, not your therapist. Researchers call this the trust paradox in AI. We have created some complex products and systems that can predict consumer behavior and detect diseases, but they can't explain their reasoning in a way that builds appropriate human trust. As AI becomes more powerful and capable of solving complex problems, it actually becomes more opaque and harder to understand, leading to less of trust from the users. And that matters more than most companies realize. So I'm going to throw a stat at you. Sorry for that. But according to Gartner's research, 30% of Gen AI projects will be abandoned by end of 2025. That's almost one third of AI initiatives. And a lack of trust is stated to be one of the leading reasons why. Meanwhile, a Harvard Business Review study tells that companies that implement transparent and ethical AI see 20% higher adoption rates on average from their users. So the message is fairly clear that transparency isn't just nice to have, it's essential for AI success. When designing AI experience, we walk a tightrope. On one side, there's a temptation to create magical, seamless experiences where the complexity disappears. On the other, there's a need for transparency that builds human trust. I call this magician's dilemma. How much of the trick do you actually reveal? Let me give you an example. I recently got an email from my fitness app congratulating me for my fastest mile ever. I was excited until I realized I had left my phone in the car being serviced. Apparently, my mechanic is an Olympic level sprinter. When I reported this error, the app sent me a personalized training plan based on my mechanic's performance. It was confident and precise with analytics, but completely wrong. This perfectly illustrates magician's dilemma. You may want to ask, Pawan, how does it perfectly illustrate magician's dilemma? I'm glad you asked. The creators wanted the magic of impressive personalization, but without revealing what's actually happening under the hood. But that magic backfired spectacularly the moment it failed. So without transparency, I lost trust and deleted the app. At least when I'm working with a human coach and the human coach is wrong, they can explain their reasoning, even if their reasoning is I wasn't paying attention. To better understand this challenge, I want to introduce and reference research on AI trustworthiness from organizations such as NIST and European Commission. This research identifies three major trust barriers to AI adoption. The first is the ability barrier, where users can't verify if the AI is competent at its task. According to trustworthy AI research, users need to understand an AI's ability, its performance, fairness, robustness, and capacity to improve. Without this understanding, humans lose trust. Without transparency, users invent their own explanations and usually assuming the worst. A second barrier is the process integrity barrier. When users think they have more influence than they actually do. Frameworks on trustworthiness research developed by NIST highlight process integrity as essential. And what does process integrity mean? It simply means knowing how the AI makes decisions. So users need to understand not just what AI decides, but how it decides. We all experience this with recommendation system. You give a thumbs down or up to a video or a song, and the algorithm responds accordingly. One of my friends spent 3 months clicking not interested on all the cooking videos in his Facebook feed. And can I tell you a secret? Let me just check whether he's okay. He's not here. Uh, so he doesn't cook. He never has, never will. He once burned water. He put water in a pot, forgot about it. The water evaporated and the pot melted. You're showing cooking videos to that person. Even today, he sees videos on magic tikka masala or Maggi tikka masala recipes, even after clicking not interested. Now he only looks into Instagram for Bollywood rumors and does not use Facebook anymore. But you get the gist here, right? Users need to have an influence in terms of decision making with AI. The third is what I call the intention barrier. When AI appears certain, but users can't understand its goals. This reminds me of one of my ex-colleagues who works in international marketing for a reputed brand. Her team implemented an AI translation tool to localize products for international markets. So during a major launch in Japan, the AI confidently translated this technical specification with claimed enterprise grade accuracy. My colleague trusted translations and proceeded with publishing only to receive calls from Japanese partners saying critical safety warnings were actually reversed, which means suggesting something that was dangerous. The problem wasn't really just the translation error. It was more around the system gave no indication that it struggled with technical safety warning. Despite presenting its work, fundamentally there was a misalignment in terms of what AI's actual capability were and the impression of the capability it conveyed. She told me later on that, Pawan, I don't mind a system that needs occasional corrections. Like human transition would do that. But I can't work with a system that doesn't signal when it's out of depth, when it is not reliable. So it seemed designed to project confidence rather than accuracy. I think that was an interesting, very interesting point she made. That some products are designed to project confidence rather than actual quality of the recommendations. Users need to understand what the AI system is trying to accomplish and whether their intentions align with their own interests. I talked about some problems and barriers in the first part of the talk, and let me now talk about how do we go from an opaque to a transparent AI. Research from organizations such as Deloitte and Microsoft introduced a concept called trustworthiness cues. These are signals that communicate the underlying quality of an AI system. I visualize this as a spectrum. On the far left, we have a magic 8 ball, which is completely opaque, that provides results with no explanation at all. On the far right is what I called an oversharing frame. Systems that explain absolutely everything about how they work, including the details that you never wanted to know. Let me give you an example. This is a crafted example, not a real one. But Adobe Lightroom's auto tone feature analyzes your image's histogram distribution and applies a sigmoid curve to the luminance values of the color gamut through a perpetual mapping algorithm. By the time it finishes explaining, your kid would have graduated college and you no longer remember why you wanted to edit the picture. Technically, the description was accurate, but deeply unnecessary. Most of the products need to land in the middle. Neither of the extremes are really well thought of. But I've seen, this is personal experience, but far too many are stuck on the magic 8 side of the spectrum than the other end. And let me share two real world examples where you would or you might have experienced this. So the left example is from Apple's photo memories. In 2021, Apple changed their Photos apps algorithm to prioritize creating memories collections based on recognized faces. So what you see here is one of the earlier versions of the product. When launched, users noticed something felt off about the automatically generated albums, but couldn't explain why. Without transparency, theory spread on tech blogs that Apple was using facial recognition for marketing data, pushing certain types of content. Privacy concerns and user frustrations apparent because they avoided transparency part when they made the first version of the change. When you see the feature today, you will see there are the memories as well as how did it end up in that particular album. Could be the location, it could be the person, it could be a group of people. They fixed that after the first version. And in contrast, Dark Sky Weather app, which is now part of Apple Weather, actually, who took a different approach even when they launched it very first time. Instead of showing a rain icon with 80% chance of precipitation at 2 a.m., they show a precipitation chart with confidence intervals that visually narrow or widen based on prediction certainty. When the forecast is highly certain, the visualization makes that clear. User research showed this honest presentation of uncertainty increased trust in the app because people could make informed decisions about whether to carry an umbrella on borderline days. This is what AI trustworthiness frameworks call a well calibrated trust judgment, which is users understanding both the abilities and limitations of the system. Let me share a very interesting observation. There is this two ends of the spectrum, but interestingly, research on AI transparency warns us of a pitfall here too. Sometimes showing explanations can actually lead to overtrust. Studies found users equate explainability with capability, assuming if an AI can explain itself, it must be good at its tasks. Researchers call this an unfounded heuristic. This could lead to inappropriate trust. Remember, I talked about appropriate and inappropriate trust at the start of the call. So let me give you an example, a real world example. So my friend Alex became extremely obsessed with a fitness app that gave detailed explanations for its workouts recommendations. This app would say things like, I'm recommending high intensity intervals today because your high heart rate variability indicates slight fatigue in your nervous system, or your sleep quality was 7% below optimal, and your recovery metrics should tell you that you should focus on cardio rather than strength. So Alex was absolutely convinced that this is a scientific marvel. He followed the advice religiously, even when he was super exhausted from the workouts or the recommendations were not aligned with its goals. When asked why he trusted this app so much, he said it explains everything so precisely, so it must know what it's doing. But what Alex didn't realize was the app was using the same generic templates for everyone, plugging in metrics to sound impressive. When they compared notes with other users, they all discovered that they were seeing the same personalized recommendations, even though they had different fitness goals and levels. The app wasn't analyzing anything meaningful, just really good at sounding like it was. But those detailed explanations created such powerful illusion of competence that users like Alex trusted it way more than their own bodies. It's like a digital equivalent of someone using fancy jargon to sell snake oil. If they explain why it works and in an impressive manner, surely it might work. Last I heard from Alex was developing his own app that gives random fitness advice, but delivers it with confidence and complex terminology. He secured 3 rounds of venture capital funding so far. I'm obviously kidding. Only 2 rounds of venture funding actually. Based on my experience, building and fixing AI products across industries is challenging, but there are some learnings from all of these products and experiences, which I call a glass box framework. These are 4 principles that would help you build trustworthy AI experiences. First is setting clear expectations. Be honest about capabilities and limitations. This addresses the truthfulness condition, using cues to honestly represent AI's capabilities rather than overpromising. Upfront about what your AI can and cannot do before users engage with it. My favorite example of this going wrong is with a friend in marketing. Her agency implemented a popular Gen AI tool, not Adobe Firefly, which was marketed as revolutionary image generation tool. In training, it was presented as technology that would help marketeers create custom visuals for their campaign needs. 2 weeks after launch, a designer spent press time trying to create this AI-powered image generation tool to generate accurate product images for pharmaceutical client, believing that the tool would create compliant medical imagery. The resulting image contained subtle but critical inaccuracies that would have violated regulatory requirements. Yet they realized that this tool was never trained on medical imagery or regulatory compliance standards. It was creating visually impressive images without understanding industry specific requirements. This is not a failure of AI's technical capability itself. It was failure to set proper expectations about its limitations when it was being sold. Before you even show AI results, explain clearly what the system can do, what it can't do, and how it should fit in users' workflow. Most AI product launches still follow the ancient marketing wisdom, which is promise the moon, deliver a nice photo of the moon, and hope nobody notices the difference until after the quarterly earnings call. As users become more AI literate, this approach is as sustainable as my New Year resolution to eat more frequent healthy meals. Impressive in theory, but abandoned by January 3rd. Let me talk about the second principle, which is show your work or reveal key factors behind decisions. This particular principle aligns really well with organizations like NIST and UN Commission when they call cues that reflect the underlying model's trustworthiness attributes. This means showing users the primary elements that shaped AI's output. So think back to your math classes when the teachers would say, "Hey, show me your work." They weren't just being difficult, wanted to see your thought process, not just the answer. This is similar with the experiences we build. I experienced this principle in action at Adobe recently. So we implemented an AI-based customer behavior prediction system that was impressive, but still facing adoption challenges. Even though it was powerful and accurate, nobody wanted to actually use it. And the solution was very simple. We just applied this principle, which is added a feature to show influential factors behind customer behavior predictions. With this transparency, suddenly the perception of AI black box was shattered. And we saw a huge spike in terms of trust and usage within a few months. People don't need to understand every detail of how AI works, but they do need to see key factors that influence its decision. It's like crime shows where the detective explains how they solved the case at the very end. Nobody wants to see a 42 minutes of unexplained investigation only to have detectives say at the end, "Trust me, this person did it." And the show ends without any evidence. So same goes with your AI. Nobody wants to be arrested by your algorithm without understanding what put them on the suspect list. I am so proud of this last line. Let's move on to the next principle, embrace uncertainty. Being honest about confidence levels. This connects very well with what AI trustworthiness guidelines call the calibration condition, which is helping users make well-calibrated trust judgments, systems confidence levels. It is simply meaning that clearly communicating how certain or uncertain the AI is about its output. Let me tell you an example from an Adobe product. One of my friends, Elena, who works in a video production company at a major media brand, they use Adobe's Premiere Pro, and Adobe Premiere had launched an AI-powered auto captioning feature to generate initial transcripts of all of the content. So the original design simply showed editors a completed transcript with no indication of confidence. The problem with that version, some portions were perfectly transcribed, while others had background noise, accents, or terminology which were completely wrong. The problem here was that without confidence levels, editors had to carefully review each word equally, creating a massive inefficiency in the system and the workflow. The, the underline that you see here shows that the confidence score need not be an actual score. It could just be an affordance for where humans may need to double check. It does not tell that I'm 100% or 50% confident. It just gives an underline saying that, hey, you may want to check this word. Inspired by Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, AI researchers point out something very fascinating here. And I think I realized that after I had this discussion with my colleague, they discovered that users of the system actually engaged in two different types of processing when evaluating AI systems. One is the systematic processing, which is slow and careful, while the other one is heuristic processing, which is fast and based on shortcuts. When we clearly communicate uncertainty, we help users know when to slow down and actually engage in systematic processing. Our brain has two modes. First is let me carefully analyze this, and the other one is looks good enough. Without uncertainty signals, we default to the second mode, which explains approximately 90% of my online shopping regrets. But here is the surprising part. Being honest about certainty actually builds more trust than false certainty. When weather apps show precipitation ranges rather than exact percentages, users rate them more trustworthy because the uncertainty matches their real world experiences as well. And finally, talking about meaningful control, which is letting users influence the system. This is what frameworks call agency affordance. This means providing controls that actually impacts the system behavior in understandable ways. Let me give you a quick example. I saw this principle in the popular photo editing app that claimed that they have an AI powered enhance feature. It had sliders with vibrancy, detail, and magic. They had a slider on magic. And when I move this slider, there was nothing happening to the photo. There was no changes. I played around with the sliders and I deleted and never opened it. So this was one of the bad examples where even though you give the controls to users, it does not really change the output, which means this principle is violated and users sort of lose the trust on the app. And contrasting this with what we see in an enhanced feature of Spotify, you might have seen that feature in playlists. When you enable it, it clearly explains that it will add recommended songs interspersed with existing ones. It also shows you the right diagram, but the green box, it's an recommended song that is added. It gives you one-click options to remove it or keep those additions. This is a good way of implementing this principle. The control should be meaningful, the impact should be visible, and the interaction would then build the trust with the recommendation systems over time. Designing transparent AI is not just a UX challenge. It's an organizational battle. You'll encounter resistance from so many directions, right? So engineering pushback. Data scientists and engineers might resist transparency for valid reasons. I remember a meeting I suggested explaining key factors behind our recommendation engine. Our lead data scientist looked at me as if I had suggested that we publish our source code on the billboards for New York's Times Square. He told me this model uses 200 variables with complex interactions. We just can't simplify without being inaccurate. To be fair, he was correct. We had to find a middle ground, which we ended up doing. And we didn't explain every variable, but identified 3 or 5 top factors that influenced each recommendation. It wasn't comprehensive, but it was honest and useful. This is an interesting concept. The idea is about expensive trustworthiness cues. So signals that cost time, effort, engineering resources to implement, that cost is precisely what makes them credible to users. So completely different context. Think of it like buying flowers for your partner, right? Sure, you could text, I love you, but somehow spending $50 on something that would live for 3 days is way more convincing. Expensive signals work. The key is collaborative education, helping your technical teams understand that users don't need perfect explanations, but they need useful ones. The other directions of resistance would be business resistance. They would come up with arguments like, hey, transparency will reveal our proprietary method, competitors highlight flaws, or confuse users with too much information. Trust me, we have had these conversations. The only way to solve that is either run an A/B testing, do a testing on transparent and black box version, and prove that the transparent version is actually going to give you better results. We did that back in India when we were working with financial services. So the idea is that you would get arguments from the business teams, and the only way to prove that is to put it in front of customers or users and prove them wrong. And then finally, legal concerns, which is also one of the most difficult ones. Your legal team would raise valid concerns about liability, especially in regulated industries. And getting approval from legal is like trying to convince your parents to let you stay out past curfew as a teenager. So the first reaction is always no, followed by a detailed lecture about all of the worst case scenarios that you never thought were possible. It's exactly the same with legal team. The key is usually to bring legal team into the design process way earlier so that you can design for those problems rather than afterwards where you are just presenting the designs for approval. This is the trick that has worked for me in the past. A key point here, it is nobody's role to develop or build this trust inside the product. But designers and product managers are the mediators between AI trustworthiness and user trust. You are responsible for crafting trustworthiness cues that bridge this gap. It reminds me of a classic scene. I think you might have seen any sci-fi movie, right? You see some has to translate between the logical alien species and emotional humans to prevent an interplanetary war, right? Except saving the earth, you are trying to stop people saying, hey, AI hates me when their vacation photos get categorized as wildlife. After working with multiple products, I realized that AI trust is actually an evolution process. It's not a 0 or 1 switch. It happens in levels. So usually the first level is skepticism. So the user would start, hey, I don't believe this will work correctly. After you prove that wrong or after you build enough trust, you move to verification, which is I'll check everything it does. Then you move to calibrated trust, which is I know when to trust and when to be cautious. And then you enter partnership, which is we each contribute what we're best at. Each AI product, each user goes through this evaluation. And most AI products never reach past the skepticism or verification stages because they don't provide the transparency needed to build calibrated trust. There is this term called inequality of trust, which is different group of users would have different levels of trust based on their capability and motivation to engage with the system here. When transparency is done right, users develop what psychologists call appropriate reliance, which is they know when to trust AI and when to override it, creating a collaborative relationship. Treat AI like a weather forecast, generally useful, occasionally wrong, but you still bring the umbrella just in case. We need the exact same relationship between AI and users. And then finally, I am a product manager. I'm going to talk about metrics. Throughout my career, I've identified a few key metrics that are strong indications of healthy human AI relationships. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a good starting point. You don't need to use all of these metrics for all products. Just use 2 or 3 based on the context. The 5 metrics I recommend are appropriate reliance rate, are users accepting or rejecting recommendations when they should, feature adoption depth, are users just using AI features at a shallow level or fully utilizing them, confidence action correlation, do users actions correlate with AI confidence levels, trust recovery speed, how quickly do users return after AI errors, explanation engagement, are users engaging with the explanatory elements. The unofficial 6th metric is swearing frequency. The fewer times users yell, what the heck were you thinking while using your AI, the better you are doing on the trust front. But that's unofficial, you can't measure that. To summarize, the glass box framework is about setting clear expectations, showing the work, embracing uncertainty, and giving meaningful controls. Our goal is not just to create trust, but appropriate trust, which is what I mentioned at the start. So giving users the right cues to make well-calibrated trust judgments. Imagine using AI tools where you never have to wonder, why did it do that, right? Or imagine systems that earn your trust rather than demanding it. And imagine technology that amplifies your capabilities rather than replacing your judgment. So this isn't about better design. It's about creating a future where AI enhances human potential rather than diminishing human agency. Thank you so much for your attention. Let's build AI that people actually believe in because they understand it.